Welcome to what is likely the most fun video I've ever made. I dropped the last Helldivers video a few weeks ago, and the response was absolutely certifiably wild. There are quite literally more than 1,000 comments reporting me to the local democracy officer for my thought crimes. And why wouldn't you report me? You're all entirely and unequivocally brainwashed, loyal heroes of Super Earth. But among those 1,000 comments, there were also a few theories that stuck out. Headcanon that would probably put your head in the crosshairs of a cannon from Super Earth. You get it. So today, let's look at some of the best fan theories I was able to pick out from the comments. Thank you all for participating and making this fun. I hope you enjoy the video, and if you've got more that you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. With that, let's kick things off at the top of our list with the very first fan theory. Villains. This one comes from user JS3PO3QQ7R. I don't know what that is, but anyway, they place us in the shoes of a Helldiver, questioning everything they've ever lived and fought for, saying, Helldiver, are we the baddies? Alright, I'm just kidding. Of course, Helldivers are the good guys. Let's just move on to the next one. What kind of sick person would ever think that Helldivers are a force for evil? That's just wild, unsubstantiated, dare I say, treasonous behavior. If I came across the Helldiver spouting this nonsense, I'd give him a piece of my mind, Report him straight to the nearest democracy officer. No questions asked. Illuminate from within. Alright. Let's talk about a super intriguing theory that comes to us from JustNeon7978. The Illuminates are going to come into play near the center of the map, not the edge like the bugs or bots. We know they have cloaking technology, and I think a surprise attack near Super Earth isn't beyond reach for them. I saw this comment and discussion a few times, and a lot of it is based on the appearance of these cloaked ships that float up in the sky over automaton-controlled planets. I wasn't able to confirm if they ever appear over Terminid planets, so let me know in the comments if you've seen them there as well. So there are these large, nondescript, essentially holes in the sky in the shape of massive starships. Okay, really quick, this reminded me. I know I said spaceship troopers a couple times in the last video when I meant starship troopers. Sincerest apologies. Won't happen again. I promise it will only be starship troopers from now on. Anyways, huge cloak ships are up in the sky, and there's really only one culprit that it could possibly be. Short of there being an entirely new faction that we haven't been introduced to, the only logical answer is that there are Illuminate ships floating just off planet, cloaked in what is admittedly the worst cloaking technology I've ever seen. I mean, come on, what's the point of cloaking technology if you can still tell exactly where the ship is? I thought the Illuminate were supposed to be some sort of super advanced species. This almost makes me think that it's actually just a bug in the game that we're seeing, and they're some sort of artifact from the Helldiver ships that are loaded onto the map. I don't know. Let's ignore that issue for now and just assume that there are Illuminate ships up in the sky that everyone can see. Why might they be parked above automaton planets? Why would they be around the battlefield, period? Super Earth eradicated them, right? Well, what if the Illuminate are actually gearing up for a different kind of attack? Not one that starts at the outskirts of the galaxy like the Terminids or the automatons, or potentially the cyborgs at some point, but rather, what if they strike us on our home turf? Maybe the reason they're cloaked over the battlefield is a form of reconnaissance. They're forward operating bases that are focused on understanding the military technology that Super Earth has this time around, so they can be better prepared. Last time, Super Earth reportedly demolished the Illuminate despite them being a more technologically advanced species, so I'd imagine they'd be looking for every advantage they could find this time around, and once they're ready, they'll spring a trap close to home, or, God forbid, on Super Earth itself. Using their cloaking technology, not only can they scout out our defenses, but they could also strategically pick out an especially vulnerable position, even going so far as to park above Super Earth and rain lead, or plasma, from above. All while the Helldivers are gallivanting around the universe, playing with bugs and glorified action figures. Last stop for 9 billion miles. Have you ever seen those signs in Australia where before you drive into the outback, drivers are given warnings like, no fuel for 500 kilometers? This is one amongst a plethora of other reasons of why I would avoid Australia at all costs. I'm kidding. I'm sure it's a lovely country full of great food, fun serving spots, and eldritch horror monsters that defy all human understanding. Let's turn our attention back to lighter-hearted topics: the Spanish Inquisition and colonization around the 15th century. From user A Normal Human 266, who supposes a more interesting purpose behind the spread of the terminid infestation. I've heard somewhere that Spaniards left some pigs on uninhabited islands and areas to serve as food sources in the event that someone got shipwrecked there. Maybe it's something similar with the bugs, where they were spread around so they could be used as a bootleg emergency fuel supply. We've speculated a lot about the purpose and driving force behind the spread of the terminids, but most of the speculation revolves around their spread being an efficient means of harvesting element 710. Oil. I'm just going to say oil. A more efficient means of harvesting additional oil. But A Normal Human 266 speculates that their spread actually has much more practical purposes. Mind you, this still presupposes that Super Earth, or potentially the Illuminate, are responsible for spreading the terminids around the galaxy. So shut your ears if you're afraid of a little anti-Super Earth talk. Rather than their spread being akin to a farmer planting corn across a few different fields, potentially as a way to diversify their investment in case one area doesn't perform as well as they expect, terminids are instead a lifeline. Potentially, earlier Super Earth forces discovered the oil they could harvest from terminids, and while they were also trying to expand their dominion across the galaxy, found that they didn't have enough fuel to keep going. So rather than having to transport fuel all the way out to the outer rim planets, why not just build another oil refinery at the location where the fuel is needed? Approaching it from a more economical perspective, this really makes perfect sense. Helldivers are employed at a negligible cost to farm the terminids on outer rim planets, and any costs that are incurred would quickly be offset by the massive transportation and logistics savings from getting your fuel at the point that it's needed. Honestly, this almost feels too reasonable to be a theory, and more likely just a byproduct of the way good Super Earth business is done. The only potential hole I can see is that there tend to only be terminids on one side of the map, which may just be a meta observation. The terminids and the automatons aren't teaming up yet, but it still leaves a bit of a hole in this theory that Super Earth only has refuel stations when they're going east, but not when they're going west into automaton territory. But really, apart from that, I love this theory. If humans in the real world in 2024 ever make it out into the universe, we'll probably have to do something similar and put fuel in orbit, rather than carry it all from Earth with each launch. So kudos on a really awesome fan theory. Hey, by the way, did you know that if you're watching right now, there's a 97.8% chance that you aren't subscribed to the channel? Take a second to subscribe and click the bell for notifications. It helps us grow the channel, and it allows me to spend more time creating videos for you. And most importantly, I'll love you forever. Okay, on to the next one. Revenge is a dish best served with hot lead. I absolutely love this one. It flips the entire narrative of Helldivers on its head in what would end up being such a satisfying plot twist if Arrowhead were to go in this direction. As we've talked and joked about, it's an open secret that maybe, just maybe, Super Earth are the bad guys here. And by extension, the Helldivers are not the shining examples of humanity that we're told they are. In fact, another one of you commented about this and taught me something new. I'm not going to read the entire comment, but you can pause to read if you want. Milan Stevic 8424 brings us all the way back to English class to discuss the topic of a Byronic hero. What I find incredible is that the Helldivers are practically farmed and indoctrinated into loyalty. If George Orwell could have written his books without using words, this is the video game he would make. This world building is especially important if you consider the questions of morality. You, as the protagonists, are completely anti-heroic, no matter what you do. You can practically be as virtuous as possible and a phenomenal human being who hugs everybody and is considerate to everyone, but if the organization that employs you is bad, very bad on a galactic scale, doesn't that make you a villain? In fact, you are not anti-heroic, you are what is known as a Byronic hero. A hero who exclusively does bad things for the greater good. However, unlike the classical depiction of Byronic heroes, the way you belong to a brainwashed society aligns you well with the ordinarily heroic virtues, and classic tropes of a loner rejected by society who has a distaste for social norms and is self-destructive simply do not apply anymore. So, all of this is a direct question in your face. Are you loyal to this kind of service? And people already have their response deeply embedded inside them, including me, although I'll be reported to the nearest democracy officer for having crime thoughts. Yes, Milan, you are probably going to be reported to a democracy officer. I will see you there. But all this raises an interesting question. We are playing as this Byronic hero, this anti-hero protagonist that is admittedly fun to play as. But I think part of it comes with the presupposition that we're playing as humans. It's easier to accept what we're doing because it so closely mirrors our current world. But what if we look to Serial Chiller 4522 to break us from that mold as they question the entire perspective of the game? My personal conspiracy theory, expanding on the Illuminate Puppet Master hypothesis. What if humanity was completely subjugated by the Illuminates after the First Galactic War? Super-Earth is actually the Illuminate homeworld, or maybe just a forward operating base, and they use Helldivers to defend it. They farm humans by incubating them in a Super-Earth simulation, like the Matrix, and this is why they have memories of family, friends, etc. When fully formed, they're put through either the Helldiver training simulation or an SEAF simulation, see below, frozen and then sent off to either bug or automaton territory. So think of unfreezing on your destroyer as being born into the real world for the first time. With Helldiver life expectancy plus or minus 2 minutes, they'll never have time to sort out the truth. As for the normal-looking human bodies found at these sites and others, they could be the Super-Earth Armed Forces engineers who went through Super-Earth Armed Forces simulation training cycle while incubated and, after being born, lived long enough to figure out what's going on. They rebel, which is why they're being put down. Going one step further, what if the cyborgs are all that's left of original humans? They're in hiding, augmenting themselves for a rematch to reclaim their place in the galaxy. They created the automatons using scraps and dead Helldivers to serve, as the game has stated, a vanguard, to help them buy more time until they're ready for a full-scale attack. Repurposing enemy soldiers conserves resources they don't otherwise have. This whole time, we're running around as Helldivers, putting down Terminids and automatons left and right, and we feel good, because Helldivers are a self-insert. We're defending freedom and yada yada yada. But what if it's all a lie? Under the helmet, Helldivers are nothing but the tools of the Illuminate, thoroughly and completely controlled by the Illuminate faction to do their bidding. Think about it. You, as a player, don't have any history with the character you're playing. You don't build up their skills over time, you're just given control of a random Helldiver and told to go at it. You could essentially be the futuristic equivalent of a drone operator, sitting on your couch controlling a Helldiver out in the field. In fact, in this scenario, it might be that we are actually playing as the Illuminate. Meanwhile, the true humans are what's left of the cyborg faction on Cyberstan. If we ever make it there, we may find that they're more familiar than we've been warned. I'll leave this one with one final pie-in-the-sky idea. Imagine the Helldivers make it to Cyberstan and discover that the cyborgs are actually sympathetic, that we realize we're being controlled by the Illuminate, and that the cyborgs might actually be our allies. Instead of calling in airstrikes, maybe we call in a squadron of cyborgs to help us on the battlefield. I'm probably putting ideas out there that are way too ambitious, but that's what I get for diving so deep. Precious cargo on board. Next up, a theory that will strike at the heart of the mystery around the Helldivers. We all know that they're woken up out of cryosleep to fight on the front lines, but what if we apply the same thought as the previous theory, the one talking about leaving fuel depots across the galaxy, to the Helldivers themselves? This theory comes from your boy Chips Ahoy 6758, though they claim it comes from someone else. Likely story, Helldiver. I won't report you to the Ministry of Truth if you don't report me. Chips Ahoy says, saw this somewhere on Reddit, but the Defend launch rocket mission passengers may be frozen Helldivers kept on that planet. So, rather than bringing out Helldivers from Super Earth all the way to planets they need to fight on, what if they're already there, waiting on faraway planets as literal sleeper agents, waiting to be woken up and sent into battle? You, as a fellow Helldiver, are sent in on a rather simple defense mission to evacuate high-value assets, but it's not clear what those assets actually are. It's worth noting that the other launch mission is explicitly called out as a mission to launch an ICBM, not to evacuate high-value assets. In the ICBM mission, you're told the purpose of your mission, and even if you don't always believe it, you can see the missile exploding after launching it. In the evacuation missions, they are just that, evacuations. You are explicitly removing something from the planet, though what that something is, we don't know. Imagine now that you're running a two-front war spread out across dozens of planets in the galaxy. One of your biggest inconveniences would be getting soldiers to the front lines. Maintaining supply lines is a necessary thing in war, and getting cut off from your source of infantry would spell certain defeat. Instead, you might consider seeding each planet with additional resources, and seeing as you can indefinitely freeze humans and wake them up whenever they're needed, why not just store some planet-side? You obviously can't store hundreds of thousands of Helldivers on the ships, and I'm sure it costs a lot of space money to constantly ferry Helldivers from Super Earth to random planet systems across the galaxy. We know that Super Earth is nothing but cost-conscious. Overall, a pretty interesting theory. I'd say my biggest problem with it is not so much a problem as it is a question. These missiles with high-value assets are on planets that are not under Super Earth control, so we're forced to come to two explanations. Either A, the stored Helldivers are being planted there in secrecy, possibly stored there soon after Helldivers begin to liberate the planet, or B, these Helldivers have been there for a long time, as in, they've been there since Super Earth had control over all of these territories and planets. I guess on the short end of that time frame, we're talking about 6 months to a year, but the other possibility is that these Helldivers have been frozen on the planets for much, much, much longer, planted there and maintained like cattle soon after the end of the First Galactic War. Super Earth has managed this stock of soldiers across the galaxy as a contingency, ready to activate whenever a new galactic war was poised to begin. Despite this being a little more far-fetched, it's so far-fetched that it almost seems like the more plausible option to me. But what do you think? There are probably a few other plot holes in here. I'm not sure about the timeline to plant these soldiers across all of these planets, not to mention the actual number of Helldivers you would need to support a program like this, especially in the earlier days of Super Earth, or the period of time immediately following the First Galactic War. There likely would have been a shortage of soldiers after successfully driving back the Terminids, Cyborgs, and Illuminate. I'm not certain Super Earth would have had enough volunteers to make a program like this worthwhile. Sending a few hundred divers to a few planets probably wouldn't be that effective. You would need to send thousands to each planet to have contingencies around the galaxy. I'm too deep down the pipeline. Time to back up to the source. Eradicating the source. At the time of recording this video, Actually, this is based on the time that I wrote the script, which is probably a few days before I recorded it, and a few more before I can edit everything. But at the time of writing, the battle is raging on with the automatons in the northwest region of the map. We haven't reached Cyberstan yet, but we're making our way. Or at least, we're trying to. Much can be said about Cyberstan, the homeworld of the cyborgs, and I really have already said a lot about it. But it raises another question. We know about the homeworld of the cyborgs, Cyberstan. We also know about the home of the Helldivers, Super Earth. But Patrick Nerdu744 raises another question. Where is the Illuminates' homeworld? We do know that they surrendered themselves to us at the end of the First Galactic War, and after they surrendered their technology to us, they were imprisoned on their homeworld under Super Earth's overwatch. The same question is why we do not see the Terminids' homeworld. Did we do something terrible to them? A couple points here. Patrick mentions that Super Earth imprisoned them on their homeworld. I'm not totally sure if that's true. I think I may need some of you to confirm from the first Helldivers, but I believe the Illuminate just surrendered and then fled back into deep space, essentially to a place where humanity couldn't follow. So whether we'll ever find them is a mystery, but I do want to touch on the last point. Where is the Terminid homeworld? And did we do something terrible to them? First of all, I think it's pretty obvious that we did something terrible. That's pretty much all Super Earth does. Terrible things. The Terminids do have a homeworld attributed to them, Kepler Prime, but like the Illuminate home planet, it doesn't show up on the map for the current war. That isn't to say we haven't been there, though. Missions in Helldivers 1 sent Helldivers to Kepler Prime to clear out Terminid hives, so maybe there will be opportunities in the future for Helldivers to head back out there and see where we left things. That said, there are some interesting theories I came across while researching for this topic with a post from Alien Finder X on Reddit. I've been studying the galactic map and I noticed something. Both Kepler Prime and Squath Shrine, the homeworlds of the Bugs/Terminids and the Illuminate/Squeath, are nowhere on the map, while the homeworld of the cyborgs, Cyberstan, can be found. What happened to those worlds? I can see Super Earth keeping the location of Squabai Shrine a secret, as it's a treasure cove of advanced technology, but Kepler Prime? Unless Kepler Prime was somehow destroyed when it was pumped completely dry of element 710, oil, it would not make any sense why it's not marked on the galactic map, unless Super Earth had erased planets from the map, as there's something on the planet that they would not like the citizens to know. Maybe a Terminid queen of some form of ruling caste, something like the brain bug from Starship Troopers? To me, the most interesting point here is the idea that maybe the Super Earth government erased the planets from the map. I'd assumed that they were far outside the map and we had just zoomed in on a closer view of the galaxy, but what if they're really within reach and yet Super Earth just doesn't want us to see them, or by extension, travel to them? Alien Finder X already picked most of the speculation meat off the bone here, but I do think the possibilities are super interesting. We already know, based on the past videos, that Bile Titans would have been considered medium or small on their home planet. So what if Super Earth is hiding something much, much larger on Kepler Prime? Something so large that no amount of 500 kilogram explosives and ICBMs of Liberty would scratch it. Sure, the Hive Lords are probably coming, but think bigger. Something truly colossal. The sort of Terminid endgame boss, something that all players will have to simultaneously attack in order to eventually destroy. I've had a pretty good record at guessing future developments, but I don't think my odds are too high on this one. It would be pretty awesome, though. Unlikely partners. Another one of my favorite theories coming up here, if not solely because the actual implications for playing the game would be so interesting. This one comes from Jerryboy7810, who says, "My theory is that at some point there's going to be a type of alliance between the bots and bugs orchestrated by the Illuminate. We're going to fight both groups on the same maps." Well said, Jerryboy. As much as I really want this one to be true, I think it makes sense. I just don't think it's going to happen. But let's talk about the idea first. Honestly, the purpose, motives, and plans behind the Illuminate are central to a couple of the theories on here. Really, I'm just hoping I can release this video before they actually show up on the battlefield. My pet theory here is that I don't think the Illuminate are going to show up until we are literally on the doorstep of Cyberstan. From a meta perspective, Arrowhead probably wants to space out the main game events and reveals as much as they can while they keep the player base active. This is, of course, if they don't lose everyone after that PlayStation Network debacle. Regardless, I put this theory here because I think it makes a good intro and jumping off point to a few other theories. To set the stage, we have the Illuminate somewhere out there, hiding in the galaxy, getting ready to attack. We know from data leaks that their characters are there. It's really only a matter of time. But what the narrative will be is still a complete mystery. The simple answer is that they will function as their own separate faction. The Terminids, the Automatons, and the Illuminate will battle against Helldivers in each of their respective parts of the galaxy, never crossing paths, always just one faction against another. But what if we imagine a more interesting and more dynamic playing field? The Illuminates in Helldivers 1 were known in part for their shielding technology. They're a more peaceful species. They're not the aggressors we see with the automatons. What if instead of engaging directly, the Illuminate would show up on the map with another faction, maybe both, and function primarily as a support role, sitting at the back of the battlefield directing traffic, placing shields around Terminids or automatons, maybe disrupting your own shields. The possibilities are endless, and it would really add a complex new dynamic to the gameplay. From the lore perspective, it does kind of make sense. I talked in the previous video about the Illuminate operating from the shadows, and while they might not get along with the Terminids, that doesn't mean they can't control them or funnel them in the right direction against Super-Earth. If I were a super advanced alien species, I wouldn't join the fight right away either. I would fight a proxy war, sending another faction's soldiers in to do the dirty work and soften up my enemy before sweeping in for the killing blow. To be completely honest, while I think this is a really interesting direction for the game to go, a large part of me thinks, especially after theorizing on how the gameplay would work, that a joint operation between the Illuminate and another faction would literally be too difficult, which is most of the reason that I just don't think it'll happen. Video game enemies are designed to have weaknesses that are exploitable by the players. Finding and using those exploits feels good, but only if the player feels like they are just barely surviving, that they just barely destroyed the last automaton Hulk raging towards them, or just barely dodged the projectile bile from a Titan. As soon as you introduce another faction into the battlefield that fills that weakness, the game could get very hard. Think about other games where you've had some sort of healer enemy or spawning enemy in the back ranks and you've been unable to reach them. Meanwhile, you're getting overwhelmed by the grunts at the front, too many to fight off. That's the future I'm picturing with an Illuminate alliance. And for that reason, I think it would just be too difficult for players, and Arrowhead wouldn't do it. Please prove me wrong. 50% bug, 50% human, 100% disgusting. Okay, actually it's like 99% disgusting. Sovlis Fire Main has two theories. The first is the 1%. It's cute. The remainder is abomination status. Sovlis Flame Main says, I have two theories, one being kinda silly and joking around, and the other one is serious. The silly one is that the Terminids aren't actually trying to hurt us, they just want to play and give us hugs, but they don't know how. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that the Terminids are just bug versions of Quokka, cute, friendly little animals that don't know enough about humans to fear them, and instead of trying to annihilate every Helldiver that drops, they just want some attention. Yeah, okay, on to the real theory. The serious one is that the Terminids, as we know them right now, incorporated human DNA into their own at some point. If you look at their patrols, you'll sometimes see them either walking single file or the smaller ones are grouped around the larger, almost like a defensive perimeter. Now, this is a theory. Not only are the automatons repurposing human bodies for their armies, the Terminids are actually our long-lost cousins. In my mind, there are two ways to approach this idea, and they vary based on the party responsible for these half-bug, half-human monstrosities. First, let's investigate the claim of their patrols. Do they exist as described, and is that a phenomenon specific to humans? I'll admit, it was a little difficult to find clips of Terminids marching in a line that's similar to how the automatons march and patrol, but they are bugs, so can we cut them a little bit of slack? Let's assume that they do have some patrolling behavior. Is that only a human thing? Not so much. There is very specifically a children's song, or a Dave Matthews Band song, depending on how old you are, that describes this. The ants go marching one by one. Hurrah, hurrah. Fun fact, as I was digging into this a little more, that children's song is actually based on a marching ballad written to celebrate Civil War-era soldiers returning home from conflict. The original first line is, "When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah." It's like, no matter how hard we try, we just can't escape war. So, The Ants Go Marching is based on a war song about humans marching, but ants do march, or at least they do follow one another in a straight line. The reason for this tends to boil down to pheromones. The leader ant sends off some signals that the rest follow, but they are kind of still marching. Okay. No shade. We're going to assume the Terminids do march, and that it is in fact a uniquely human characteristic, at least when it comes into marching into battle. That brings us to the crux of this theory. Somewhere along the evolutionary path for Terminids, human DNA was introduced. I think the less likely option is that the Terminids accomplished this on their own. Though impossible in the real world, in video game world, the only explanation I can think of for this path would have to do with the Terminids having a steady diet of Helldivers. That, coupled with plenty of mutating agents around them, like termicide, led to the Terminids integrating some of that human DNA. Unlikely. The more plausible option to me is that when the scientists of Super Earth were genetically modifying the bugs, likely to make them produce more oil, someone got a little spicy. Whether it's 50% human DNA, I doubt that. We're only like 1% away from chimpanzees or something, right? A 50% human Terminid would literally look like that spider crawling toy in Toy Story. Eesh. No. Instead, it could be plausible that a Super Earth scientist got the bright idea that introducing a small amount of human DNA might further develop the Terminid cerebral cortex. In other words, make their brains work better. Or more super. What purpose might that serve? Good question. Think for a moment about how we raise sheep. We use tools like herding dogs to control them, move them around, make our lives easier. But that requires that the sheep have some form of lower intelligence to perceive and understand what the herding dog is doing. They are able to understand their surroundings and flee to more protected areas. You can't necessarily say the same about bugs. They just either ignore you or they scatter. Maybe the plan was to give the Terminids a little bit more brain power in order to make them easier to farm. But all that backfired when they escaped and used their newfound intelligence to coordinate attacks more effectively, leading us to the current situation. All right, that was an insane amount of speculation in that one, but still an interesting theory. Let's move on to the next one. Adapt or die. All right, on to a theory that is in some ways a tangent off a couple other theories on here. We know about the cyborgs, we know what they generally look like. At least, we know what they looked like 100 years ago. But we're also given reasons from Super Earth as to why they have started to augment their bodies. Quote, they have become obsessed with the manipulation of their bodies and constantly seek to pervert the skin with machines that, according to them, gives them a higher meaning in life. But have we ever taken Super Earth at face value? Von Ludwig 6083 asks the same question, wondering whether or not the story from Super Earth is entirely factual. Here's their theory. The cyborgs began altering themselves due to Super Earth putting them into the harsh climates of Cyberstan. They were miners that were being torn apart by the condition and had to adapt themselves with machines to survive. This ties back to the idea behind why the cyborgs fled Earth and whether or not they were cyborgs when they fled. That is to say, when the cyborgs were treated from Super Earth, it's possible that they were not actually cyborgs at that point in time, but rather just normal rebels and dissidents that Super Earth wanted to eradicate. When these rebels fled Super Earth, or were otherwise relocated to Cyberstan, they found themselves in an environment that was not quite suitable for human life. To deal with that harsh reality, these humans who went to Cyberstan began augmenting themselves in order to keep up with the demands of a cold, hostile planet. Furthermore, I think what von Ludwig is getting at here kind of reminds me of the Red Rising series. Not sure if anyone here will get that reference, but these citizens of Cyberstan are sent to mine resources, and over time, in combination with adapting to the harsh climate, also begin adapting to their main job, mining. So Super Earth will walk around and say that the cyborgs created themselves, but in reality, at least in this theory, it's actually the forced relocation to Cyberstan and the forced labor on behalf of Super Earth that's actually what caused the formation of the cyborgs. Super Earth, with all their talk of treason, is actually the party most responsible for creating the cyborg threat that we faced in the First Galactic War. Now, as far as theories go, I'd say there might actually be some meat on the bone here. Oftentimes, what I would look for in a theory in order to judge it as plausible is how closely it mimics the real world. Many times the developers are getting inspiration from the current world or historical events. Now, there aren't any cyborgs in the real world as of yet, but there are plenty of times in history and presently where a group of people is roped into forced labor, poor living conditions, and general oppression. And it's these exact circumstances that become a breeding ground for rebellious activities. So, applying this to the world of Helldivers makes me think that even though we've spun a long thread here, it's not entirely out of the question. I guess this whole cyborg and Illuminate business is such an open secret at this point that everyone has a pet theory to throw around. If you have any of your own, put them in the comments. I'm still working on a follow-up for this video of fan theories that I didn't get to, so there's still time to incorporate it and get a shout out. That is, if you aren't scared of a couple Super Earth officers knocking on your front door. Cyborg red energy. Truthfully, this was one area that I didn't do justice in my previous video. I think in part because it's hard to find many clips and images of it, but there are a few, and there was a small conversation in the comments about it, so I'm going to cover it. In essence, it wasn't too dissimilar from some of the other topics discussed here, but I did at least want to address it. So, viewer Antares Dragon brings it up, saying, "You're missing the cyborg red energy they harvest from humans. Ever run through the battles and see the cages, bodies, and red energy containers? Looks like the humans are being used like the bugs." Xin Yao follows up, saying, "Bots want human brains for something, so it might be related to creating more automatons." And Anon1403 closes out the thread, commenting, "I theorize that they use their brains and the energy to turn the humans into automatons in the factories." Now, this theory is all but confirmed at this point. When you come across automaton corpses nowadays, supposedly they are substantially more fleshy than they were in the past, all but confirming that it's not all just metal and oil going on in there. In fact, many divers have noticed that when returning from a mission on an automaton planet, they don't come back covered in oil. No, instead they come back covered in blood. And there really, truthfully, isn't much of a reason for automatons to have blood in them unless they are still somehow partially human. What I really want to key in on here is something that Antares Dragon says in their final sentence. Looks like the humans are being used like bugs. What a cool twist. It's almost like every faction is using another faction to survive somehow. The only one we don't have a similar story for is the Terminids, but stick with me here. I'm about to throw out a wild suggestion. In the past, I've talked at length about how Super Earth is likely responsible for shuttling Terminids around the galaxy, putting down rebel groups, or otherwise just sending them around to keep the war going. But what if, rather than the Terminids being moved around by Super Earth, they are in fact moving themselves around via the Helldivers? Maybe, just maybe, when a Helldiver enters a Terminid-infested area, they breathe in some kind of spores or some form of Terminid eggs, and once they leave to another area and eventually die, potentially on another planet across the galaxy, those eggs hatch and bring forth a new wave of Terminids. It could be why there's a small number of Terminid kills verified on mainly automaton-controlled planets. But back to the point at hand. The automatons are almost certainly using parts of human bodies to create new automatons, which makes the giant AT-AT factory striders even more terrifying. Think about what must be going on inside of those things. Unfortunately for those humans, I'm guessing there's a pretty tight window of time between harvesting and turning a human into automaton, which would imply that the humans on board those factory striders are still alive. So, is this one settled? I don't really even want to call it a fan theory, but I think I have to until it's 100% confirmed. While we ponder on that one, let's move to the next theory. Rings on rings on rings. FYI, this one has a small spoiler that features content that was found in the game's data files. If you don't want potential spoilers for something that hasn't happened in the game yet, you can ignore this one, mute it, or skip ahead. The Galactic Map is quite a useful tool. It shows you the current status of the ongoing conflict, where Super Earth is pulling ahead, or more likely, where Helldivers are being annihilated. As it currently stands, it shows our conflict between the automatons and the Terminids mapped out across roughly 10 concentric rings. Within those rings are sectors that group several planets together, but the point remains there are about 10 tiers of distance from Super Earth. But what if I were to tell you that this doesn't account for everything? Thanks to viewer Xander Whitcroft's buddy, and a host of other individuals online that have mined the ever-living heck out of Helldivers 2, we have a little bit more knowledge about what might be coming. Interesting knowledge. The map is bigger than what you're able to see. My buddy opened the game files, and there are like 2 to 3 more rings on the outer edge of the map. 2 or 3 extra rings around the map may not sound like a ton, but once you put it into perspective, that makes room for potentially another 60-ish planets. That's conservative. We're talking about an insane increase in the number of planets that must be liberated. But it does kind of beg the question, what's the point of adding additional rings if it's just to add new planets that need to be liberated? If it's the same mission over and over, it doesn't seem like additional planets would really add all that much to the gameplay. In fact, it might even dilute it. The devs can, in fact, just change the status of the war on a whim. It might seem like the players are in control, and they might provide a bit of guidance, but let's be real. Arrowhead is planning exactly how far Helldivers are able to push, how fast they're able to liberate, and likely how difficult a mission is at any given point in time. I wouldn't be shocked if the entire percent liberated status is arbitrary and made up. There isn't really any way for the players to fact-check when there are hundreds of thousands of other players diving constantly. So, if that's the case, and adding additional planets just for the sake of adding them doesn't really make sense, what's the point? Why expand the map that much if it would just dilute everything down? Open your mind with me for a moment and expand your horizons. We all have some understanding that the Illuminate will likely make a return. The cyborgs might also come back, which means that we very well might be fighting a four-front war. But why stop there? Expanding the galactic map opens up new territories for new enemies, and potentially entirely new factions. Think about it. If you were Arrowhead Games, would you be content with using the same factions as your previous game? Sure, they added in the automaton threat, But the Terminids already existed, and if they bring back the cyborgs and the Illuminate, many players will have already faced these enemies before. No, instead, I'm theorizing here that there are potentially as many as 3 new factions that could be introduced over time. Up top, you have a clear space between the Terminids on the right and the automatons on the left, directly to the north of Super-Earth. It seems like a prime location for either the Illuminate or the cyborgs to take a foothold. I also think the cyborgs could show up on the other side of the automaton faction, but after you add these 2 additional factions, you still have so much room left on the map. So much room, in fact, that it feels intentional. Surely all the room to the south is prime real estate. For 2 additional factions at the very least, potentially even 3? Who or what then would make up these factions? I've got a few possibilities I'll throw out, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about what they might be. First up, a somewhat obvious suggestion, a faction of other human rebels from Super-Earth. Distinct from the cyborgs, this would be a faction of individuals that fled the reign of Super-Earth and have been fighting back from the edges of the galaxy. These are the people responsible for putting up those illegal broadcasts that Helldivers have to take down. There are callouts in the leaked data that hint at a character or enemy type of civilian, and an ability for those civilians to handle weapons. But this might be related to the rescue missions or other interactions you have on board the ships. It's not clear. A second new faction would be something completely out of the blue, an enemy type completely distinct from the Terminids, automatons, cyborgs, and the Illuminate. I'm probably grasping at straws here, but in order to keep the enemy types balanced, I'm thinking it would have to be another living organism / animal type, like the Terminids, but with completely distinct abilities from the bugs. And maybe there are new maps that would align with those enemy types. I'm picturing gigantic bears and other mammals running around trying to destroy the Helldivers. I don't know why we'd be fighting them in the first place, but it could be interesting. Or the developers could channel their inner Halo Combat Evolved and introduce some type of zombie enemy like the Flood, an enemy that would actively take over your fellow Helldivers' bodies and launch orbital strikes at you would be a wild addition. Enough speculating though. Let me know your ideas below and we'll see if any of us end up being correct. Fresh, never frozen. Okay, Helldivers, listen up. We need you on the front lines defending Super-Earth and spreading liberty wherever you go. Don't worry, your friends and families will be incredibly proud of you, and they'll be waiting for you to return. They'll throw parades in your honor. You'll be a hero. What? Huh? When will you get to go home? Does your family know where you're going? Well, what year is it? Okay, don't worry about it, soldier. Just get ready to take a long nap. We all know that Helldivers are frozen and taken out of storage only when they're needed, but we also know that the Helldivers themselves are not aware of that fact. They're woken up when Liberty needs defending, only to last an average of 2 minutes on the battlefield. But this theory comes from Mr. Cool 5-year-old. They take it a step further. How long have the Helldivers been frozen? And do Helldivers ever return from war? We just glazed over a few important questions when talking about the frozen backup divers. How long have they been on freeze? How many are there on freeze? How can they have a family if they're frozen down? Potentially, you could give your body for Super-Earth, then get frozen during transport to the front, then stay on freeze for hundreds of years until the Helldiver before you finally dies. Your family's long gone, bro. All really good questions. Theoretically, if we're in a society that can hold soldiers in a frozen state, the only reason to do so is to keep them there for a long time. Super-Earth has faster-than-light travel. It's not like it takes especially long to get from one side of the galaxy to another. Why would Helldivers need to be frozen unless they're expected to be there for an indefinite amount of time? We really only see Helldivers being thawed out, not frozen, which would imply to me that we're mostly just pulling them out of storage, a stockpile of Helldivers that Super-Earth has been building up over the course of the last century? I don't know. If the same freezing component existed in Helldivers 1, Someone that played that will have to let us know. But I'm wondering aloud here that if the freezing of Helldivers didn't start until after the First Galactic War, and then continued for the past 100 years, Super Earth propaganda has kept the enlistment rates high enough that they've continuously stocked up, building a reserve of troops that would be prepared to battle any enemies that came out of the woodwork in the future. Further, if they only expect you to survive for 2 minutes on average, there really isn't any risk. The likelihood of most Helldivers making it through more than 1 or 2 missions is so low that the risk of revolt or mutiny would be minuscule. In fact, maybe if you're a Helldiver that happens to make it back from a mission, you're refrozen and stuck at the back of the line, only to be woken up again decades later. At that point, you've had absolutely no concept of time, and your last memory would be of a successful mission defending liberty. For all you know, you're a fantastic soldier that's never lost and never will. Once you enlist, Super Earth will never let you retire or go home. As a Helldiver, all you'll ever be is a sacrifice in waiting for the betterment of Super Earth, liberty, and freedom. Alright, I'm going to pause there. I was going to include everything in one video, but I'm only about halfway through it, and it would take me so long to edit. I'd rather get you something now, and then something later. There are some awesome theories in the next video, so if there's one you think I should add to the list, it's not too late, and I can always do a part 3. If you haven't had a chance to check out the original Iceberg, start there. You'll probably enjoy it. If you're looking for more Vault content, I've got videos on a whole lot of other topics and fictional worlds, lots on Harry Potter, some on Game of Thrones, Star Wars, you name it. I'm also hoping to make something on Fallout sometime soon, and maybe The Name of the Wind? I don't know. Still working on it. So stay tuned. That does it for me. From one Helldiver to another, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.